My name is Victoria and this is my video out. So I grew up in New Zealand. For the most of my life I was in the largest city in New Zealand, which is Auckland. And you know, I had a very, I think, standard New Zealand upbringing. Lots of play outside, lots of time at the beach. Relatively privileged, definitely. My parents were great, really nice brother and sister, Catholic upbringing, quite a big family in terms of extended family. I really knew that I wanted to do something slightly different. From a young age, I wanted to be an artist and pursued that career, knowing that in New Zealand, being that it's a very small country, that making art was going to be in some respects easier because it's a small pool and you can do things potentially a little bit more easily because you can form small groups and you're not in this huge city. But I really wanted to see more international art and engage with international audiences, so I came to New York when I was 21. Wow. And really haven't left. So I'm now 43 years old and 44, sorry, just turned. And so yeah, I spent most of my adult life in New York City, and I love it still. It's definitely home. And I have two amazing children here as well that were born in New York. I have an 11-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son, who I'm raising with my wife. And I just got married, wow, like a month and a half ago, 2 months ago now. Sure, I realized that I was and wanted to be a part of the LGBTQ community when I was a teenager. So around about really sort of 13, 14, and at that stage I was living in a relatively conservative North Shore suburb. If you like, in a New York context, a little bit like living in Staten Island, where I'm actually now. Yeah, there wasn't any resources available at the school, or there wasn't any role models. And so I found at a very young age the thing that I would do would be go to the library, and I learned to search for book spines that had the Women's Press logo on them. And often the authors and writers, there was various themes that might be considered lesbian or lesbian stories, whether they were told sort of through the lens of close friendships. Some of them were not very explicit, but you could tell. So it was like searching for clues. It was really a trail of clues. Then I changed to a slightly more progressive school, and it was there that I first really fell for another young woman, and we were definitely not out at all. And I first maybe came out a little bit to my older sister when I was 17, and it wasn't great. The reception wasn't great. It wasn't terrible either. It was just kind of like, well, you're just, you know, exploring. And my mother then learned of it, not from me, which was unfortunate, and did not take kindly to it at all, and really didn't want to have a relationship with me if I was going to have that identity, which was very unfortunate. Not the end of the world for me. It wasn't like I was cut off from my family, but there was definitely a big divide. And then, like I say, I was pursuing my arts studies, and I came over to New York when I was 21, and didn't find community here, actually, to tell you the truth, because I was very young. I enjoyed everything that the city had to offer. It was big and exciting and different, but not necessarily easy to connect with people. So that was a little bit of a disappointment, I think. And it wasn't like the internet it was just emerging at that moment. So there wasn't platforms to meet people online or find community in that respect. And I think I was very much more then involved with and what was an arts community, which was very accepting anyway, but I really didn't have, it wasn't a huge part of my identity at that point in my life the way it is now. Absolutely, it's a long journey, and I just feel so incredibly impressed by teenagers that I work with now. Their bravery, their willingness to talk when they feel comfortable. Yeah, I definitely tried to come out when I was at Auckland University in New Zealand, and I went to a coming out meeting, my first and last, and I was the youngest person by far in the room, and I was very femme. I had long hair, and I wasn't very warmly received by the other people there, and essentially I was there not for counselling. I knew why I was there. I was there to meet people. And the leader of the conversation opened up with the session singling me out as being the youngest participant and asking me about my sexual health concerns. And the walls just closed in on me. I was like, I'm here because I want to meet someone that might potentially happen with, so I can have some concerns. So right now you're asking me to share about something that I'm new at this, and that was, very harsh. It was definitely an experience I wasn't keen to repeat. And I had several other experiences similar to that at women's centres and such at the time. Yeah. I mean, it's an incredible learning experience, yeah. I think, and I take it with me whenever I am going, and it's not just talking to young people, it's also when I'm working with elders in the community. They might not be out to, their families or want to talk about that kind of thing, and it's not always that sex is this huge part of why you're there. And as a community, I always feel like we're very over-sexualized. So that's tough, and there's not always this real positivity attached to being, to wanting to be out, So now that we get more chances, obviously, to celebrate being gay is an incredibly wonderful thing. And that I also work in a field now that that's a huge part of what I do is celebrate that, not just about myself, of course, but about historical figures and people today. Okay, so I have one of the best jobs in the world. I get to be the executive director of the Alice Austen House Museum, which is a little historic house that's located on the waterfront of Staten Island, looking out over Manhattan and Brooklyn. And we are the home of Alice Austen, who was a Victorian woman born in 1866, who led an incredible life as a lesbian woman, and we are a nationally designated site of LGBTQ history. But it's not just that. she was also an artist. She was a photographer. So she left us this incredible visual history of her life changing New York City, but also a set of very intimate portraits that potentially she intended for just sharing amongst her friends and lovers, but that we actually get to really celebrate today, and celebrate their artistic virtuosity too. It is very cool, and through that we can use Alice's work as a platform for exploring personal identity today, through photography, and we're making art about it. So it's this really positive, it can be very healing experience. But here's the big thing: when I was also talking about having some of these slightly more negative experiences when I was younger, I think it's really interesting to talk about the history of the Alice Austen Museum, because we opened our doors in 1985. Now, the original friends of Alice Austen never intended to closet her, but there was an active closeting that happened to Alice and her partner of 53 years, Gertrude Tate, over a course of what I would say is a relatively dark period of interpretation for the museum. And of course we absolutely do not do that there now. We have updated all of our permanent displays to be inclusive of that part of Alice's life story, and inclusive of Gertrude Tate, who lived in the home with Alice for nearly 30 years. I say every day's a coming out day for Alice, and every day's a coming out day for me too. You know, if I'm at the supermarket or doing something like that with my wife and children, often there's some confusion because the person at the checkout doesn't necessarily recognize us as a couple or what have you. That's okay. It's, you know, I consider it part of what I do and be is to positively present you know, my life and my choices, and well, part of it's a choice and part of it's, you know, what I feel is just the natural way that I was made to be. But for Alice Austen, you know, she was white and privileged, and she lived in an era actually that was, in a sense, while there was a lot of restrictions for Victorian women, and she bucked those trends or rules, social rules, she had the privilege of living a slightly more out existence. Whereas as she traveled into the 20th century, social restrictions obviously became more and more for, you know, same-sex couples or couples that identified in that way. So by the time Alice was potentially interviewed, which was in the very last years of her life, she didn't really talk about it. But was she asked about it either? No, she wasn't. So we rely on her photographic evidence and lots of letters, and some of them love letters, which are really wonderful historical documents that need to be made available to everyone, because this is everyone's history, but particularly for the LGBTQ plus community, it's a site of historic significance that they can come to and actually experience those things. And to closet that or not have that on display, it's just the worst thing possible, I think. When I travel, I'm always looking for places that I could possibly go and see a version of my history or something, you know, that I really relate to it. And I want my kids to see that. So I feel very proud of the work that I get to do there now. be strong is my very first thing that I would tell someone. I would also tell someone that your parents most times really do love you a lot, and any misconceptions or some of the misconceptions that they may have are simply that they don't know, have the information at their fingertips, or they need to meet other people, or be able to have the amazing experience if you have a partner of meeting them and seeing that they're a wonderful person. My parents are so accepting of me now, and that's just, I would say that we're closer than we ever have been, and they're incredibly wonderful people. I have a wonderful family. I'm very lucky, but when I think of that advice, so much of it is about finding support. When you can find another person to talk to, or you can find a group to be with that's going to be supportive, and listening to other people's stories. That's why these kind of stories are just so key, because if you have a spot where you can relate, where you can find similarity, like I did with books, then you're not alone. You just don't want to feel alone, and that's big for anyone, and for anyone growing up, no matter what. But certainly when you feel like you identify with the LGBTQ community, finding support and other people and allies, definitely, and allies, is the best thing you can possibly do. Talking is great, and listening. The question is what I feel is the biggest issue facing LGBTQ people today, potentially nationally and globally. And of course I come at that from a very personal standpoint, being a woman as well, woman identified, and I feel that there's a lot of forces, whether they be religious based, or they find meaning in persecuting LGBTQ people, removing rights from LGBTQ people, that are obviously happening governmentally and tribally, and in all sorts of societies around the world. So what's really scary is when you look into how far we've come in a relatively short space of time for the modern gay civil rights movement, and seeing how quickly some of these amazing laws and protections can be repealed, is when you feel that real sense of something that is a danger for us as a wider group. The fight for marriage equality, being able to be out in the military, trans in the military, all of these things, so incredibly important, and fundamental rights. And that's incredibly hard, and it's incredibly hard to see how many people we're losing every year in America, particularly trans women. So it's a culture, with the culture has become in recent years very divisive and toxic, and somewhat promoting of negativity and violence towards the community, and that hits home for me very, very hard. There's areas of my borough that I don't feel safe holding my wife's hand, and that's incredibly sad. Oh, so many things give me hope. Like I say, I got married just on 2 months ago, and that was really incredible. My wife's parents are Southern Baptist, and they had never accepted her as a lesbian woman living a lesbian life, and they just visited us last weekend and spent time with the kids, and well, it was really nice. It's a great step, and that makes me so hopeful. And they're from a small community, very small community in the South, and to see them take that leap, and I felt that it was incredibly brave of them, and big-hearted and generous too. And I think that also, what various people in our lives realize is that they don't have to give up a whole lot of their own convictions or religions or certain belief systems to welcome and accept LGBTQ people in their lives. It's only going to broaden their horizons and give them a higher quality of life too. Acceptance is key. Oh, favourite part about being me? Well, I guess one of the favourite parts that I think about being me is that I feel often quite different from the rest of the crowd. I actually really love celebrating difference. I kind of love that I've never really lost my New Zealand accent. I love that I come from a teeny tiny place that was one of the last places in the world to be discovered. I love that I'm a Pākehā, that's a white New Zealander, and I really, really love that I am living an out gay life. And I love my 2 kids, which are an extension of me.